Hello again and welcome to another bearing removal and installation video featuring Boca bearings. Today's engine, I'm going to be replacing the bearings in one of the smallest OS 4-strokes ever made, which is the OS FS26 Surpass. Now I've got this engine all disassembled and pretty much ready to just punch these bearings out, so let's go ahead and go to the table and get this done. Okay, on the table I believe I have everything necessary to remove the set of bearings in this OS FS26 Surpass engine. You can see how small the crankcase is of this engine. So I've got the crankcase here. It's still got a little bit of disassembly lube on here, so that should help me get those bearings out. I've got my trusty but getting rather worn hardwood block here to put on the crankshaft as I tap it out. Light hammer, flat nose punch, my bench vise, heat gun, and my heat protective glove. So, without any further delay, let's just begin heating this crankcase up and get these bearings out. Okay, hopefully that should be warm enough to get this crankshaft out here real quick. There we go. She's out, and the bearing came out with it, which is fine. I'll address that in a second. So the next thing I've got here is to just remove this front bearing. And I'm just going to stick this flat nose punch in here and just catch one of the inner race here. Probably could have maybe used my wood dowel, but no worries, that's out. So our crankcase is free of bearings and now can go in the ultrasonic cleaner. As you can see, it really needs to be cleaned up and get cleaned up. Front bearing is out. Now all we have to do is remove this rear bearing from the crankshaft, which is not a big deal. Sometimes it comes out like that and I kind of prefer that, and it looks like this one at least came out and gave me a gap, but since this crankshaft has got a cutout in it, no worries whatsoever. So what I do here is I just put my flat nose punch on here and just start tapping it down, and then just kind of rotate the crankshaft around just to get this on several different sides. So it's coming off now. A couple more taps and it'll be free. And that's all she wrote. That really nasty bearing is free and will be completely discarded. And now I can go and clean these parts up and do the installation of a new set of bearings. Okay, so on the table now I've got a variety of different tools that I'm going to use to install the new set of bearings in this engine. So I've just taken this crankcase out, dried it off. I haven't lubed it up yet. This is all nice and clean. The crankshaft is nice and clean and ready to accept some bearings. I've got my standard, I've got my wood block here. Now I've got a small flat nose or flat blade screwdriver, and we'll talk about that in a minute. My very beat up socket extension that I use to drive the crankshaft into the crankcase. And I've got an articulating, not like I'll be articulating, but I've got a magnet on a stick here with a T-pin attached to it, and I'll talk about why I need that also. Again, my light hammer, desk vise or bench vise, glove, heat gun. I've got a bottle of Boca's Lightning Lube Road Power here that I use as an installation lubricant, and a jar of where I dispense that. So typically what I'll do is there's probably enough in here to actually lube this engine up, so I'm not going to dispense it. But what I would do is I'd put one pump in there, and that's usually enough for me to lube up everything I need to lube up. So let's just go ahead and get that done. I'll go ahead and I just do this with my finger just because it's just easier. I can feel where that oil needs to go. And I'm going to be oiling, well, I'm going to oil the entire area of this crankcase, even though For right now, I'm only putting the bearing in, but I mean, why not? I've got my finger oily. Why not just go ahead and lubricate everything I can? So here's our crankshaft. Go ahead and slather a nice little dab of oil all over that. As I'll get it all over everything. This lightning lube, this Road Power, is a really good assembly lubricant. So the bearings that I'm going to be installing here, I've got the kit number, and the kit number is ENK-075. So that's what we're going to be putting in here, and this leads me to explaining why I've got a little bit different tools here. So the front bearing, actually both of these bearings are metal shielded, and they say ZZC. And I'm always under the impression that the C means clip, and it certainly does mean clip here, and I'll go in and talk about what clip means. This one to me just looks like a standard ZZ bearing, and I'll also talk about that. And that's why I need these other tools, not this one right now. So let me open up this bag here with the front bearing in it, and I'll probably zoom in digitally and shove this thing way up in here. So this is one of those bearings that you could actually service if you need to service a bearing. If it was in our application here, we don't service bearings, we just replace them. But the outer shield here, or the shield here is actually retained by a clip. So you can actually get a T-pin, that's why I'm going to use this T-pin, get the T-pin in there and undo that internal C-clip, and then that's what enables me to get this out. So this is tough because A, it's small, and the clips, the way the clip is cut, I'm left-handed, so I do this with my left hand, so I had to kind of pre-figure out which way the clip is cut, and I'll see if I can get this on my hand here and explain that really well. Where it's a cutout, the way the clip is cut, if you're going in here, let me just use this as an example. If you're going in here like this, you want to be able to try to find the cutout that's kind of cut down so you can kind of hop in there and pull it up like that. But initially this was flipped over, and the slope, the downward slope was going, so I couldn't get in there and get the clip. So it was kind of tough. So I kind of did that one in advance, and that's why I need this magnet too, because sometimes you take that clip off and the seal just doesn't really want to just pop right out like it should, but you can easily grab it with a magnet. So this bearing is ready to go, because for the front bearing, I only always remove one side, one seal or shield, whatever the case may be, and that's the side that faces inside the engine. So I don't believe that I need this T-pin anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and put it on my magnet and move it out of the way. Now this one, it says it's a ZZC also, but I don't really believe that it is. To me, when I see these little gaps in this outer race or the shield, to me that means it's just a standard ZZ shield, which means for me to remove both sides of this shield, I use a little bit different technique. I'll use this small screwdriver, and I go right in above the inner race and just push down and lift up, and that's how you get that seal out, or shield in this instance. And so for the rear bearing on these engines, we always want to have both sides open. That's just as easy as that. So we're done with that. Now what I can do is get a little bit of this lightning lube, and I just want to put a little bit on the outer portion of each race too, just so that we've got a little bit of lube on both the mating parts and the bearings going in there. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just go ahead and push this rear bearing on the crankshaft. Sometimes these are a little bit snug, so I like to either, if it doesn't slide on right away, I usually flip it over and see if it's a little bit more willing to go that way. In this instance, it's not. So just for the heck of it here, not like it's really going to make a big difference, but we're going to give it a shot and see. Sometimes you'll get a bearing that'll really slide on really easily, and sometimes you won't. So this is going to kind of lead me into another thing where how I actually clean up crankshafts. So when I clean up a crankshaft, you can put it in the ultrasonic, but you're still going to have to really kind of get a lot of that carbon off. So I'll just use a really small piece of 600 grit sandpaper and of course lubricate. And I'll just go over here and I just rotate it through here. Grit side down, obviously, and this will get all the carbon off. And many times this is enough to facilitate and allow those bearings to just slide back on again. So now that I've done that, I'm going to clean this off again. I'm going to wipe the whole crankshaft off again and re-lubricate it. And see if that bearing is going to want to slide on there, and if it doesn't, that's fine too. It'll get inserted the same. So the process for this is I'll always install the front bearing first, and then I install the bearing on the crankshaft, and then I put it on there. It doesn't feel like it's going to want to go on there any looser. Let me flip it over one more time and see if that... Sometimes on the inner race of the bearings there's a chamfer. Nope. That's just... There we go. There we go. I found the way it went in. So now that's in there. So like I was saying, I put the front bearing in first, and then I'll always put the bearing on the crankshaft, and that way the front bearing acts as a centering mechanism, so that if you were just to put this in there first, it's possible to get it off center, and you don't want to go doing that. So that's why the front bearing always goes in first. So now I'm going to just put my glove on, heat this crankcase up, and we'll get these bearings installed. This crankcase is pretty small, so it shouldn't take a whole lot of heat to get that to expand a little bit. Okay, so our front bearing's in. Now we just gotta get that centering mechanism here for that. And looks like my jaws are already set for that, so I'm just gonna take my glove off here real quick and we'll drive this bearing home and we'll be done. And is it in there fully? I don't believe it is yet. Actually, no, it's not. I think that was the problem. There we go. There we go, and now our crankshaft and new set of Boca bearings is fully installed. Now the reason it didn't go in initially was I didn't have this moved over enough so that the crankshaft wasn't touching the bottom here. I had to get it so it was in that gap, and that's what allowed me to pop that in all the way. So that's all there is to installing, removing and installing a set of bearings in this OS FS26 Surpass engine.